What's up, y'all? Today, we're going to be taking a look at all of the mechanics that the Pokemon Trading Card Game has had throughout the years, since day one. And there have been many. Some have been good, some have been bad, and some you probably have never even heard of. I'm going to be ranking them between S tier and D tier in today's video. I'm going to be ranking them by not just how good they are game design wise, but how memorable are they. The aesthetics are certainly going to play a role as well, because when you're playing a game, how something looks and feels, that's all part of the gameplay experience. So for me, aesthetics do play a big part in it. Also, the aesthetics play into a mechanic's memorability, which is also a big part of it, but the mechanic also has to be very fun. So how fun is the mechanic? How good is the gameplay design? That's all going to be kind of wrapped up into how I rank these. We're going to kick things off with Pokemon VMAX. Pokemon VMAX were kind of the iconic mechanic of the Sword and Shield block. It would eventually evolve into Pokemon VSTAR, which were kind of a different thing. Pokemon VMAX were gigantic, bloated rulebox Pokemon that had 300 plus hit points and gave up 3 prize cards when they got knocked out. They all evolved from Pokemon V. They didn't have any sort of special thing that kind of made them stand out. They didn't have like GX attacks or V-Star abilities. They were kind of just big guys that evolved from other big guys. And that became extremely evident with the VMAX gameplay. A lot of times, the first player to evolve their VMAX Pokemon into play was heavily favored because they then would have an opportunity to knock out the opponent's lower HP Pokemon V for 2 prizes. And then sometimes Pokemon VMAX would one-hit KO each other, and that would lead to some really short games where there wasn't as much time for players to make counterplays and interact with the opponent. So the VMAX era is one of the worst and most boring as far as gameplay design goes. So we feeling C or D, chat? I think we just set the stage for the whole tier list by saying VMAX Pokemon go in D tier. Definitely one of the most boring and underwhelming mechanics that the Pokemon Company has ever, I was going to say crapped out, but that kind of sounds... It's the epitome of lazy design. V-Star Pokemon, which came out at the tail end of the Sword and Shield block, did offer a nice little remix on the VMAX formula. They only gave up 2 prize cards as opposed to the 3 prize cards that Pokemon VMAX gave up. 3 prize cards is literally half the game. I mean, if 2 VMAXs get knocked out, the game's over. Pokemon V-Star only give up 2 prizes, so you could afford to lose more of them throughout the game, which in turn made games last a little bit longer. They were also massive, averaging about 270, 280 hit points if we're talking about the best ones. And what made V-Stars unique was that they all had a unique V-Star power, which was either an attack or an ability that could be activated once a game. And we've seen this kind of once a game thing happen twice throughout the Pokemon TCG's history. There were GX attacks, which we'll get to in a little bit. So V-Star powers did kind of echo that GX attack, which was a thing during the Sun and Moon era, and that does make games kind of fun. Gives you some sort of very broken power, but you can only use one throughout a game, so you have to think of when you're going to use that power or attack. And it is worth noting that, V-Star powers were interesting because some were abilities and some were attacks. Like Arceus V-Star with its Starbirth ability allowed you to just go search your deck for whatever 2 cards you wanted and put them into your hand. And then Dialga V-Star probably had the best attack. Star Chronos, right? 220 damage, allows you to take another turn. That's a regional winning strategy right there. The gameplay definitely got more interesting than what we saw with the VMAX era. However, one of the major problems with VMAX is still persisted with Pokemon V-Star, and that's that the first player to establish their V-Star and use their power was still favored because all Pokemon V-Star evolved from Pokemon V. which have less HP and give up 2 prize cards. You still had this unfun dynamic of the first player to get their V-Star into play and powered up not only had an advantage because their opponent would have all of these low HP Pokemon V in play that could be knocked out for 2 prizes very easily, but also they got to do their very broken thing before the opponent got to do their very broken thing. I mean, Arceus V-Star, the first person to get Arceus V-Star into play would Starbirth for whatever combo piece they needed to take a very dominant early lead. With Lugia V-Star, the first player to get their Archeops into play via Summoning Star would be able to take a very dominant lead because the opponent's board would be filled with very easy to knock out 2 prize Pokemon. And the basic Pokemon V were kind of the sore spot for the entire Sword and Shield block because a lot of them were nothing burger Pokemon that just kind of had a lot of HP and didn't really offer a lot as far as interesting gameplay development goes. They were mostly just liabilities that sat around and waited to evolve into their V-Star or VMAX counterpart. So V-Stars were definitely a step up on VMAXs, but still not one of the best mechanics that the Pokemon TCG has ever seen. Solid C-tier entry. So Pokemon V were not that great, and honestly, it ended up being a real low point in the history of the Pokemon TCG. A lot of the Sword and Shield era also took place during the pandemic, so not only was gameplay kind of uninspired, but there also weren't any premier tournaments to grind for because the pandemic was happening. So definitely a low point in the history of the Pokemon TCG, and that got switched up entirely with the release of Scarlet and Violet and the introduction of, or I should say, the reintroduction of Pokemon lowercase EX. Pokemon lowercase EX are just kind of beefed up Pokemon that still evolve from regular Pokemon, and they give up 2 prizes, right? Like your Meowscarada EX evolves from Florigato. And that's different than a Pokemon V-Star or a Pokemon VMAX because the big issue with Pokemon V-Star and VMAX was that they evolved from these bloated 2-prizers that were big liabilities on the board, and the first player to get their big guy into play was at a very high advantage. With Pokemon EX, they evolved from your regular Pokemon, which made deck building interesting as well because you could have like a Pidgeot EX and a regular Pidgeot in the same deck. It definitely creates some more interesting deck building when you have Pokemon that all evolve from the same pre-evolutions, when those pre-evolutions don't give up a significant amount of the game's prize cards. It just makes things really nice for deck building and gameplay. Gameplay instantly started to improve upon what we saw with the Sword and Shield block. And these early EX Pokemon have definitely made a huge impact on the game. They don't really have any unique mechanic going on other than that they are 2 prize Pokemon that evolve from regular Pokemon. They don't really like have a very special notable ability or like a power or like a trait or anything like that. GX Pokemon, which were kind of the equivalent to these lowercase EXs during the Sun and Moon era, had a unique attack that you could use once a game. These Pokemon don't have that. By and large, for me, I think the lowercase Pokemon EX are just a better game design than V-Stars and VMAXs, but a lot of these lowercase EX Pokemon from the Scarlet and Violet era aren't really all that interesting. I feel like it was kind of a needed reset to kind of cleanse the game of all of the really grossly designed Pokemon V and VMAX and V-Star. I think the Scarlet and Violet era lowercase EX Pokemon belong in B tier. It's kind of like the median mechanic, right? It's been successful in the game's past. You have these 2 prize Pokemon that evolve from regular Pokemon. It's just pretty good game design for the Pokemon TCG. We've tried all different variants of the 2 prize mechanic and the 3 prize mechanic at this point, and I think after playing through all of them, I gotta say, The 2 prize mechanic does, in a lot of ways, make the game more fun, but my major beef with the 2 prize Pokemon, the Pokemon EX released in the Scarlet and Violet era, is that they have so much more HP than their single prize counterparts, which kind of forces you to have to play them. 2 prize Pokemon from the game's past were not that much stronger than their single prize counterparts, which actually made them more fun to play together. And that's why I think that these are just B tier. So the Scarlet and Violet block flattened everything again and reset the power level of the game around these lowercase EX Pokemon. Then they introduced the Tera mechanic, right? Which kind of plays into the connection with the video game where Pokemon can be different types. Now, Pokemon has done mechanics where Pokemon are different types than their normal type before, most notably the Delta species mechanic, which is one of the most beloved mechanics from the history of the Pokémon TCG. I don't think that this Tera mechanic lived up to the Delta species mechanic, which was a thing during the mid-2000s. They kind of diluted everything that could have been with the Tera mechanic and having Pokemon exist as different type Pokemon into EX Pokemon wearing hats, and they all have this bench barrier thing, and that's it. It doesn't have any connectivity over to the video game and just seemed like a very lazy slap-on mechanic to give all of these EX Pokemon just a blanket bench barrier. They can't be damaged on the bench. You do, of course, have some cool Tera Pokemon like Charizard, which is a darkness type Pokemon, right? And that's cool because usually Charizard is fire type, and this is a darkness type Pokemon that takes fire type energy to attack. So it does create some kind of interesting gameplay stuff. There's not really any other deeper thing going on other than this is a dark type Charizard that takes fire energy and it has bench barrier. You do have certain trainer cards that only interact with Tera Pokemon. You also have abilities that can only be activated if you've got a Tera Pokemon in play. Another thing that I think is kind of not cool is that only EX Pokemon could be Tera. The Tera mechanic is relegated to only the EX Pokemon. That's another thing that I have an issue with the current game design, is that they're not doing any of the cool mechanics with single prize Pokemon. Ultimately kind of leads to a flattening of the gameplay experience because single prize Pokemon aren't being involved with the cool new mechanics that exist. It's kind of forcing you to play the 2 prize Pokemon instead of having very valuable and integral single prize Pokemon that are mixing it up with your 2 prize Pokemon. Another thing that the Tera Pokemon pretty much all have in common is that they have these attacks that are difficult to pay for, all cost different energy, which kind of plays into the flavor of them, right? They are these Pokemon that have different kinds of types going on, but other than that, I feel like Tera Pokemon were pretty uninspired. I would actually give Tera Pokemon a lower ranking than the base EX Pokemon because I feel like it was a missed opportunity. Pokemon could have used the Tera mechanic to do something kind of really cool and groundbreaking, but instead they kind of just gave us more of the same and something that felt really uninspired. So I'm going to knock it down from the base Scarlet and Violet EX, give it C tier. Another remix on the EX Pokemon that they did during the Scarlet and Violet era is the Owner's Pokemon. We saw introduced in Journey Together and then continued in Destined Rivals. This is a rehash of the Owner's mechanic, which we've seen go in and out of the game. Honestly, even though it is very nostalgic to see Owner's Pokemon again in the Pokemon TCG, I've always hated it. I've always thought that Owner's Pokemon are kind of a bad game design. And my biggest beef with the Owner's Pokemon is that they all have to evolve from the Owner's pre-evolution. It really inhibits your deck building. N's Zoroark EX, for instance, has to evolve from N's Zorua, and N's Zorua cannot evolve into a regular Zoroark or a regular Zoroark EX. One of the things that I loved the most about the introduction of lowercase EX Pokemon to the game again is that you could combine evolution lines. That's something that makes it really fun to deck build, is having a Pidgey that could evolve into multiple different things all in your deck. That's just fun deck building. It allows you to splash different Pokemon and lines and do different things. But the owner's Pokemon cannot do that because of the way that the mechanic works. All N's Pokemon have to evolve from their N's counterpart. All Lily's Pokemon have to evolve from their Lily's counterpart. And there are, of course, like powerful trainers that go with the various owners' Pokemon, like N's PP Up, N's Castle. There's Lily's Pearl, which makes your Lily's Pokemon give up less prize cards. For the most part, it's pretty difficult to splash owners' Pokemon with other archetypes. Right now, Gardevoir EX decks are playing Lily's Clefairy EX because it's a very strong card with a strong ability, but it being a Lily's Pokemon really has nothing to do with anything. And then Zoroark EX is being played because it's a very broken card that can draw a lot of cards with its trade ability, but it feels awkward to splash stuff in with the Zoroark EX deck because you have to have an N's Pokemon on your bench that Zoroark can copy, and then if you're playing other Pokemon and Zoroark can't copy those, the owner's mechanic is very insular, right? It kind of feels like the Pokemon Company is giving you a prepackaged deck and saying, this is the way you kind of have to play these Pokemon. Anytime it feels like the Pokemon Company is kind of giving you a pre-made deck or a pre-made strategy and telling you this is the way you have to play it, that to me is kind of bad game design. Not a huge fan of the owner's Pokemon, never have been. Just because there is a successful deck using a mechanic doesn't mean it's a good mechanic. Doesn't make it good game design. Like Mew VMAX was one of the best decks of all time. That doesn't matter. VMAXs are still D tier. Yeah, I think that owner's mechanics are just terrible game design. I hate that they can't be played with anything else. It feels like Pokemon is giving you a prepackaged deck. I'm slapping that in D tier for sure. While we're here, got to talk about the original owner's Pokemon from Gym Heroes and Gym Challenge. I mean, super nostalgic. And I feel like that's kind of what the newer owner's Pokemon are trying to play off of, is our nostalgia. Something that really bothered me about the newer owner's Pokemon is that, like, if you're going to play the nostalgia card, the newer owner's Pokemon don't even look like the older owner's Pokemon, right? Like, at least lean into the nostalgia a little bit. Maybe have the cards look or feel similar in a way, right? As far as like their design goes. Honestly, none of these cards were very good. You had a couple that were like very good, like Rocket Zapdos, but it being a Rocket's owner Pokemon had nothing to do with it being a powerful card. It just is a powerful card, right? It's just a big basic that dominated. Other than that, it being an owner's Pokemon had nothing to do with its success. All of the different trainers that they printed to interact with the various owner's Pokemon were pretty much all terrible. As much as I love how visually appealing and collectible these early owner's Pokemon are, I have to acknowledge that it's just a trash gameplay mechanic. I mean, I have a master set of Gym Hero and Gym Challenge because I think that these cards are so cool. These are some of the only sets that I've ever master collected. I really don't master collect a lot. From a gameplay perspective, the cards are just pretty irredeemable. So I like the aesthetics of the original owner's Pokemon more than the aesthetics of the modern owner's Pokemon, but the modern owner's Pokemon are like more playable than the old ones were, but it doesn't really matter. They both are terrible mechanics and belong in D tier. People really seem to like the design of Pokemon SP. Pokemon SP are a lot like owner's Pokemon in that they have an owner right there on the card. Like you've got Togekiss with the champion Cynthia there. You've got Pokemon FB, which have leaders from the Battle Frontier. You've got Pokemon G, which are Team Galactic. And then you've got Pokemon GL, which are from gym leaders. So pretty cool little mechanic. The thing that I really appreciate about the SP Pokemon is that they have kind of eliminated my biggest complaint with the owner's Pokemon mechanic, which is that they can't evolve from regular pre-evolutions. Blaziken SP doesn't have to worry about evolving from a regular Combuskin or anything because they just made all of the Pokemon SP basics. In fact, they're just all kind of powerful, big basic Pokemon, which is okay. I mean, you're kind of eliminating that whole side of the Pokemon TCG by making these Pokemon SP, but it did make them fun to deck build and play with because you could easily splash a Pokemon SP into any type of deck because they didn't have to evolve. So from a deck building perspective, Pokemon SP are really fun and people really enjoyed them. They have all of like the cool aesthetics of having a gym leader or a champion or even a villain attached to them. I really love the silver border hollows of the level X's, which is its own mechanic. Level X is kind of how they introduced evolving or leveling up to these Pokemon SP, right? Because as non-evolving basics, they are kind of one-dimensional in that way. They're just all these single prize, non-evolving basics, but then they decided to make them more multi-dimensional by introducing the level up mechanic. Leveling up kind of fixes the whole lack of evolving thing with Pokemon SP. It allows them to level up when they're in the active spot. You can only level up a Pokemon from the regular SP when it's in the active. It adds to that card, kind of in the same way that Pokemon BREAK did, except I really like what Pokemon BREAK did with the horizontal card layout because Pokemon BREAK retain all of the attacks and other stats from their previous card except for hit points. Level X Pokemon retain all of the attacks from the previous level, but also replace the retreat cost, weakness, resistance, all of that. For me, the thing that is most successful about the SP mechanic, not only is it flavorful, not only do the cards look really sweet, the thing that makes this such a successful mechanic to me, the SP mechanic and the level X mechanic, is that these cards could easily be splashed into and played alongside other non-SP cards. And that was something that you saw all the time during this period. The SP era also had some of the only counterspell type cards ever printed in the Pokemon TCG. One of the most notable ones is this Power Spray Trainer, which you can only play if you have 3 or more Pokemon SP on your board, and it just stops your opponent's Pokemon power from going into effect, right? Like you play Power Spray during your opponent's turn, and you could only do it if you had 3 Pokemon SP in play. So like that is also a really cool kind of step and dimension for the Pokemon trading card game. There's only a couple of cards that triggered during your opponent's turn, and this is one of them. And it was a card that saw a lot of play during its time in Standard. So I'll be putting Pokemon SP and Pokemon Level X both in A tier. They play really well with other cards. They kind of eliminated the biggest problems with the owner's mechanic and were very iconic during their time. Let's talk about Mega Pokemon EX. Mega Pokemon EX are back in the Pokemon TCG, and with them we have the return of the 3-prizer, which we saw during the VMAX era. We also saw it at the end of the Sun and Moon era with Tag Team Pokemon. We've got 3-prizers back. Now, obviously, 3-prizers were kind of a stain on the Pokemon TCG's history during the Sword and Shield era, if you ask me. To have the game revisiting them, I don't love it. These Mega Pokemon, in my opinion, don't seem very interestingly designed. They're kind of just huge, and that's the thing. We did just see Tord Reclev win the Las Vegas Regional Championships with a Mega Absol EX, Mega Kangaskhan EX deck, just an entirely big basic deck. From a gameplay perspective, it doesn't bother me that we are kind of going back to these big basic 3-prize Pokemon. It's fine. The game has been there before, but from a game design perspective, these modern Mega Pokemon just aren't really inspired. We've kind of already done all of this before. The only new thing is that now we've got these stage 2 3-prizers, which I guess is something that we've never had before. We've essentially had stage 1 3-prizers because it's more or less what Pokemon VMAX were, except these don't evolve from Pokemon V. They do evolve from regular Pokemon, which does make them better than Pokemon VMAX, in my opinion. We've also already had giant basic 3-prize Pokemon. I mean, Mega Absol EX has the same amount of HP as like your Arceus, Dialga, and Palkia GX, right? It's kind of just a revisiting of that thing, except these guys don't have the very cool GX attack. That's kind of like boring, in my opinion. I think that these new Mega Pokemon are just boring. I don't really think that they bring a lot to the Pokemon TCG other than just being huge bloated dudes. They are very cool Mega Pokemon as a kind of mechanic within the franchise. People really love Megas, and people have been waiting a long time for Megas to return to the Pokemon TCG since the X and Y era. So from a collectability standpoint, you gotta give it to the Megas. They are very cool in that regard. Even looking back at the Mega Pokemon from the X and Y era, those were all pretty much terrible, and they didn't really offer a lot as far as like gameplay mechanics go either, but they're very collectible cards. So I gotta say, the Mega Pokemon are always gonna be neat looking. They're always gonna be collectible, but from a gameplay perspective, I think they're kind of just bloated and boring. Like the new Megas, the old Megas from the X and Y block, also extremely iconic. I love the Japanese text flowing through them. That to me is one of the most identifiable things about these cards. And then the Japanese versions of the cards have English text flying through them. These Pokemon were not really well designed, in my opinion, though. They had these things called Spirit Links, which you had to use in order to make it so that they didn't end the turn when you evolved them, right? Whenever you tried to evolve your Rayquaza EX into a Mega Rayquaza EX, you'd have to deal with the Mega Evolution rule, which says when one of your Pokemon becomes a Mega Pokemon, your turn ends. So evolving into them literally ended your turn. I do respect that from a game design standpoint, because at least they were trying to reel in the power level of these cards. The game designers kind of acknowledged that these were some of the most powerful cards that the game had ever seen. They were some of the first cards to break that 200 hit point barrier, which was monumental at the time. At the time, Big Basic Pokemon EX had about 180, 170 hit points. So for Pokemon to be up over 200 HP was a really big deal, and the game designers knew that. So they really wanted to rein them in and make sure that they were balanced. And they did that by giving them the Mega Evolution rule, which ended their turn when they evolved. You could bypass that Mega Evolution rule if you played some of these goofy Spirit Links in your deck, which were tool cards that you attached to your Pokemon EX, and they allowed you to Mega Evolve into a Mega Pokemon EX without ending your turn. Okay. My problem with Spirit Links was that every single Mega Pokemon had its own Spirit Link. It was obnoxious. As someone who played during the X and Y block and had to keep a collection of Spirit Links, it was a nightmare keeping all of your Spirit Links in order, right? Because for every single Mega Pokemon that you had to have a playset of Spirit Links to go with them. I would have enjoyed this original Mega mechanic so much more if there was just one Spirit Link that helped all of your Mega Pokemon to ignore the Mega Evolution rule. And I think that that would have been fine. One of the biggest problems with these Mega Pokemon was that they were very hard to play with other things. A lot of Mega decks, like this is Grant Manley's third place U.S. Nationals deck from 2015. A lot of these Mega decks just played a fat Mega line and then maybe like one other guy, and that's the deck. Because you had to play like a 4-3 line of your favorite Mega Pokemon, and then you had to play a gang of these Spirit Links that had no effect on the game other than allowing your very broken Mega Pokemon to evolve into play. So I didn't really love that. I thought it would have been cooler if the Spirit Link could be attached to any Mega Pokemon, so that way if you wanted to splash like a 1/1 other Mega into your deck, you could do that. In a lot of ways, these original Mega EX Pokemon feel a lot like the VMAX mechanic because they all have to evolve from these big basic EX Pokemon, and they just kind of make deck building boring because you have to be fully committed to your Mega Evolution line in the same way that you had to be fully committed to your VMAX line. I do think that these are slightly better developed than Pokemon VMAX, though, because their power level was reined in and it didn't make them oppressive to play against or anything like that. It didn't feel like the first person to get their Mega Evolution Pokemon into play was like so much further ahead than the player who got their Mega Evolution into play second. Almost all of these Mega Evolution Pokemon were pretty unplayable. You did have some that were quite good. Mega Rayquaza EX was quite good. Primal Groudon EX was quite good. You did have Mega Mewtwo kind of become its own deck for a little while. Mega Audino won Worlds. I mean, yeah, Mega Audino EX did win Worlds. Kind of like the biggest one-hit wonder of the Pokemon TCG ever. This Mega Gardevoir, which is also a dual type, which is another mechanic that we're going to get to, was also pretty decent. I think that the X and Y Megas were okay. I do think that they're more interesting than our current set of Megas. They're more balanced than our current set of Megas, but really, I am not a fan of the Spirit Link thing, and I think that that just clogged up decks and really limited deck building creativity during the time. I'm going to put the original Mega Evolution Pokemon in C tier. Sorry, current Megas. Ultimately bland. I think they belong in D tier. Really not bringing anything special to the Pokemon TCG. If I'm being honest, I think that as far as aesthetics go, the older ones looked better. Now, before Mega Pokemon EX, there were regular Pokemon Capital EX. This was the Pokemon TCG's kind of big reintroduction of the two prize Pokemon. Originally in the Pokemon TCG, all Pokemon only gave up a single prize card. And then you had your original lowercase EX Pokemon, which were printed in the mid-2000s. And then during the Diamond and Pearl era, they stopped printing multi-prize Pokemon, which is something that people really enjoyed. It changed the pace of the game dramatically. They reintroduced the concept of the two prize Pokemon during the Heart Gold and Soul Silver mini block, really brought it back with a vengeance during the Black and White era. Next Destinies, Mewtwo EX, kind of the dawn of a new era. Pokemon Capital EX just changed the way the game was played completely. We went from having multiple evolution-based decks to the game just being absolutely dominated by big basic Pokemon, because Pokemon Capital EX, unlike Pokemon lowercase EX, did not evolve. That was the thing with Pokemon Capital EX. Even if it was an evolution Pokemon, they did not evolve. They're all basics. They're big basics. All of them. They pretty much all had 170 to 180 hit points, unless you're a Molga who only had 110 hit points. Some of the very strong support Pokemon, like Jirachi EX only had 90 hit points, but gave up 2 prize cards, right? They all give up 2 prize cards. And there were different flavors of Pokemon Capital EX throughout the years, like the Mega Pokemon we just talked about. There were Team Plasma Pokemon as well. They kind of reinvented the Pokemon Capital EX throughout the years because Pokemon Capital EX dominated the game from the Black and White era all the way up through the X and Y era. So for 2 entire blocks, big basic Pokemon were the way of the Pokemon TCG. Sometimes you would play your big basic Pokemon with a single prize evolution Pokemon as support, but big basic Pokemon EX were almost always the primary attackers, like we would see with Keldeo EX. Keldeo EX would be played with Blastoise, which had its Deluge ability, and you could accelerate water energy onto your Keldeo to do lots of damage. Mewtwo EX and Darkrai EX, some of the most iconic Pokemon ever in the history of the game, but they're just big basic. So you would kind of just combo these big basic Pokemon with the most broken trainer cards you could get, and that was the deck, right? And there were a lot of decks like that. Virizion Genesect, for instance. You had Virizion, which could accelerate energy onto your Genesect EX. Genesect EX had a very cool ability, which could gust things up and then blow things up with its powerful SPEC card that was designed just for your Genesect EX. They're all basics. The biggest of which, of course, was Wailord EX, famously got second place at the 2015 U.S. National Championships, a Wailord stall deck. You've got the biggest Pokemon legal at the time, 250 hit points, is a basic Pokemon, right? The deck never attacked. It was just a deck that tried to stall your opponent out. I don't even, are they well designed? Not really. I don't know. I started playing the Pokemon Trading Card Game right before the introduction of Pokemon Capital EX. Many of my fondest Pokemon TCG memories are of these Pokemon Capital EX. But looking back at them, trying to conceptualize 2 entire generations of multi-prize Pokemon and ask if they're actually good game design, I don't think that they are great game design. The thing that I really respect about the Pokemon Capital EX was that throughout the course of 2 blocks, the Black and White block and the X and Y block, Pokemon did a really good job of keeping their HP total in check. They did a really good job of that. And what that allowed was it allowed single prize Pokemon to continue to play nice with the Pokemon Capital EX because the HP was always in check. In the modern Pokemon TCG, it feels like the game designers have just completely done away with all HP checks, and now the multi-prize Pokemon's HP is increasing at a rate far more drastically than their single prize counterparts. So that gulf between your multi-prize Pokemon and your single prize Pokemon is getting bigger. If you look at Tornadus EX, Darkrai EX, 180 hit points, right? And then you look at a card that was printed much later, like Yveltal EX, printed during a different block, still 170 hit points. They did a good job of keeping them balanced with the rest of the card pool. They did come in and just straight up dominate, change the landscape of the Pokemon TCG forever. The game really will never be the same because of the years that we spent playing with these Pokemon Capital EX. And it kind of feels like the big bang of the Pokemon TCG when you look back and think about it, right? Next Destinies was kind of like the big bang moment for the Pokemon TCG. Everything before it felt like something different. If you want to go back and play retro formats, a lot of people are most interested in playing formats before the introduction of these Pokemon Capital EX because these Pokemon Capital EX kind of ushered in the modern era of the Pokemon TCG. Games got quicker, Pokemon did way more damage, you could build decks entirely based around big basic Pokemon with huge amounts of HP and ridiculous attacks. That kind of stuff had never been done before in the game design of the Pokemon TCG. And I'm not really mad that the game designers decided to go here, because when you're designing a game like the Pokemon TCG, I mean, they really had done a lot of very cool and creative and different things leading up to this time. I do feel like these Pokemon EX kind of changed the game in a way that it can never go back to the way that it was before. These Pokemon were the start of what would eventually make the Pokemon Trading Card Game the long-lasting, more popular game than it is now than it was back then. The game is very popular now. It's kind of going through a renaissance. Tournaments are bigger than ever, and these Pokemon EX really helped usher in that era. So it's hard for me to knock them. I'm going to go ahead and slap them in B tier. I think they're all right. I don't think that they are the best that the game has to offer, but Pokemon coming out with these EX is now just such a large part of the game's history. It's like impossible to think about the Pokemon Trading Card Game without these Pokemon EX. They are some of the most iconic Pokemon in the game's history, and because the game designers kept their HP in check throughout the years, they all ended up playing pretty well with each other. One of the other flavors of Pokemon EX was the Plasma mechanic. Something that I really appreciate about the Plasma mechanic was that it wasn't limited to exclusively EX Pokemon. There were single prize Pokemon that were Plasma Pokemon, and they were really important to the Plasma deck, which was one of the most powerful decks during this time. This Kyurem here is one of the best attackers. They also have these cool blue borders, right? Which was something that I think they should do more of in the Pokemon TCG. Whenever you get these kind of off-color borders, I think it just sets the cards apart. They just look so good. The Plasma stuff was the real deal. Ended up, getting second place at Nationals and Worlds, I think. I think Ryan Sablehouse, second place national championship with the Plasma deck. And then I think second place at the World Championships as well, getting second to Jason Klaczynski, Simon Nerode. Very, very powerful archetype. The cool, flavorful cards really set the Plasma cards apart for me. You've got like Hypnotoxic Laser, which was one of the most iconic trainer cards during the Black and White era. It's an item card, makes your opponent's active Pokemon poisoned, and then you get to flip a coin, see if they're asleep as well. Very, very powerful card. The Plasma Lugia EX, very strong Pokemon, could take additional prize cards when it took a knockout. You had to have Plasma Energy attached to it in order to use it. Plasma Energy could be accelerated into play with Colress Machine, which is an item. It allowed you to search your deck for a Plasma Energy attached to one of your Plasma Pokemon. It was just cool. I really liked the blue borders. I really liked the flavor of these cards. They felt very fun to play with and build decks around. And I felt like the Plasma set was kind of a villain block done right. If you look at like the Destined Rivals set that just came out, it felt like that was a villain set and a villain mechanic kind of done wrong. All of the Rockets cards are terrible, unplayable filth. You can't even play any of the Rockets cards meaningfully splashed into any other deck, but many decks would play some of the Plasma cards because they were just that good, right? Like you would play Hypnotoxic Laser because it's just a really good card. Compare a card like Hypnotoxic Laser to a card like the Team Rockets Bomb, which is just imagine if the Rockets cards had like a red border on them though, or like a big R kind of like splashed in the middle of it, right? And they just don't. They just don't, right? They don't look as cool, dude. Separate yourself from looking at the full arts because, yes, the full arts have been something that has been great for the evolution of the look of the cards throughout the game's history. But, like, I'm just talking about the base level cards. Like, you can't even tell that these are Rockets cards, you know, other than the little rocket grunt in the corner. But, like, this doesn't have any flavor to it. Imagine if this had like really striking red border or like looked dope in some kind of way. It just doesn't. It just looks kind of like where you look at like any of these plasma cards and they just pop off the page. They look different. They feel different. They've got the plasma shield there. They've got the blue border. I mean, they look incredible. I really think that the plasma mechanic was a villain mechanic done correctly, and it was a lot of fun. We're going to put plasma in B tier right here with the capital Pokemon EX. I feel like plasma was like a really nice mechanic for the EX Pokemon. It was a lot better than the Mega Evolution mechanic for the EX Pokemon. And certainly the most flavorful version of the EX Pokemon that I can think of. The best EX variant. A tier? No, I'm still not putting anything EX in A tier, I don't think. I think it's like high B tier, but you got to save that stuff for the good stuff. While we're talking about villain mechanics done correctly, I mean, my goodness, these were incredible, right? I mean, this is what I'm talking about. Pokemon should do more stuff like this. Look how freaking cool these cards look. Headringer and Jamming Net. Now, the problem is Pokemon only printed 2 of these. There are only 2, bro. There's Jamming Net, which is a Team Flare Hyper Gear, and there's Headringer, Team Flare Hyper Gear. They've got this like huge Flare logo emblazoned across the card. You can barely read it, but God, it looks awesome. The whole card is dipped in red, and these tool cards are actually really groundbreaking for the Pokemon TCG. They were released in Phantom Forces during the X and Y block. These are tool cards that you can attach to your opponent's Pokemon EX, so long as they don't have any tool cards attached to them. So this actually introduced some really interesting counterplay, because if you wanted to bench your own Pokemon EX, but make sure that your opponent didn't put a Headringer on it, right? Because Seismitoad decks played Headringer. This was a good card with Seismitoad EX, which is one of the most iconic Pokemon capital EX ever, item locked, right? So Headringer makes it so that the Pokemon it's attached to's attacks cost 1 colorless energy more. So Seismitoad decks would item lock you, and they would put Headringer on your Pokemon EX, and then you're item locked, and you can't really do anything. This is a really cool thing. I have to say, visually and gameplay-wise, these are incredible. But the problem is, Pokemon only printed 2 of them. What a letdown, right? Because you have such a cool thing. You have all this potential to like lean into this Team Flare mechanic, but then all we got was like some item cards that say Team Flare gear on them, right? Like Battle Compressor. You could see the little Team Flare logo on it, and it says Team Flare gear. But outside of that, like they didn't do anything else with Team Flare, which to me just seems like a huge letdown. So as much as I love the design visually and gameplay-wise of cards like Jamming Net and Headringer, they're so unique. I feel like this is like the perfect villain card. They just didn't elaborate on it at all, which is just so baffling. I love the Flare gear though, so I'm going to put Flare gear in A tier because it's such an epic mechanic and they look so good and they're so unique. I just wish Pokemon had done more with them. Another thing that we saw during the EX era was the dual type Pokemon. And we've seen dual type Pokemon throughout the history of the Pokemon TCG. Pokemon Legends were dual type. Pokemon Delta species were dual type. You even had some dark Pokemon were dual type, like your Dark Rockets Pokemon. Yeah, Dark Magcargo, Dark Gyarados were part dark and part fighting, and they got to be both types in the Pokemon TCG. I think dual type Pokemon are really sweet. I love the fact that you can hit for 2 different weaknesses. Some of them even have 2 different weaknesses, which is kind of fun, right? They don't really do that anymore, but Pokemon used to have 2 weaknesses sometimes. Dual type Pokemon are just neat. Probably one of the most iconic dual type Pokemon of all time is Volcanion EX. The dude literally hits itself for weakness, which is pretty funny. And Volcanion being a fire and water Pokemon. What better Pokemon to make a dual type Pokemon than Volcanion? Aesthetically, I really like the way that they used to do the dual types. I mean, like, the Legends Pokemon all look pretty neat. They don't make dual type Pokemon like they used to. The horizontal streak going through the Volcanion is certainly kind of ugly. I think that the Volcanion gameplay-wise and dual type Pokemon gameplay-wise are freaking sweet. There's not too much more to it other than the fact that the Pokemon is 2 types, right? Do you like that as a gameplay mechanic? Yes or no? The answer for me is yes. Unfortunately, it seems to me like the game designers don't really like doing dual type Pokemon anymore. We've seen a lot of this lately where Pokemon just get kind of like a ability that makes them have 2 types, which I hate. I think this sucks. I wish that creatures would stop doing this because the cards just look so much more fun if they're dual type, right? Right. We're putting dual type Pokemon in A tier. Another funny thing they did during the X and Y block that helped add some flavor to the Pokemon capital EX was that they gave some of them ancient traits. There's even Mega Evolution Pokemon that have ancient traits, like Mega Rayquaza EX has got the Delta Evolution trait. You can play this card to evolve a Pokemon during the same turn that you played it. One of the most influential ones was Primal Groudon EX, which could not be targeted by trainer cards. So that meant that if it was on the bench, your opponent couldn't use Boss's orders to bring it into the active spot. Except it wasn't Boss's orders back then. It was Lysander. Couldn't use Lysander to bring it into the active spots. I think that these ancient traits are pretty neat. This is a kind of pseudo ability, right? But it can't be turned off. That's what makes it a trait. Abilities can be interacted with, but the traits could not be turned off. That's kind of what separated them from being abilities. So they're kind of like just abilities. They're not that deep. We're going to put them in C tier. They're like, okay. One of my favorite things that Pokemon did during the X and Y block was the Pokemon Break mechanic. Now, Pokemon Break, some people love them. Some people hate them. I personally am a Pokemon Break lover. They're freaking gold, man. I mean, like, they're literally gold. Like, how did the Pokemon get gold? I don't know. I love it when Creatures does stuff in the trading card game that is like trading card game only, right? Like this is just TCG only canon. There's nothing in the video game that like makes a Pokemon Break or gold or whatever. This is just purely TCG stuff. You got to be a real TCG head to know what a Pokemon Break is. And the cards, they all had this like really unique squared hollow pattern, kind of looks pretty funny. But these cards are all kind of like level ups, except you could evolve your Pokemon into a Pokemon Break at any point. Didn't have to be in the active spot. It could be on the bench. And Break Pokemon were kind of like an extra evolution step. So your Greninja, which was a stage 2 Pokemon, would evolve into a Greninja Break. So the joke is that Greninja Break is like a stage 3. Right? And Greninja Break is probably the most iconic Pokemon Break. Pokemon Break basically gives the Pokemon that you're break evolving a boost in HP, and then either a nice little attack or ability, and then it retains all of the stats from the card that it evolved from. So Greninja Break would retain the weakness, resistance, retreat cost, and attacks of the Greninja that it evolved from. I played Zoroark Break in my top 8 2017 North American International Championship deck. Zoroark Break's a ton of fun to play. Made it so that your Zoroark, which had the Mind Jack attack, which did 10 damage plus 30 more damage for each of your opponent's bench Pokemon, could also use Foul Play, which copied any of the opponent's active Pokemon's attacks. Kind of turned your Zoroark, which is a stage 1 Pokemon, into a Pokemon with like a stage 2 option. And it felt really fun to deck build with these Pokemon Break because they really elaborated on the concept, the core concept of evolution in the Pokemon TCG. I think that the game is generally better when evolution is a core component of the game, and that the game designers are really thinking about how to use evolution in fun and creative ways. I also just really love the artwork and the design of the Pokemon Break. Big shouts to Carbink Break as well. My wife, Natalie, got second place at a regional championship with Carbink Break. I also got 9th place at a regional championship, an expanded regional with Carbink Break in my deck. Trevenant Break was also a huge one. You would play Trevenant Break with the item locking Trevenants from X and Y base set. So you would item lock and then spread damage counters on all your opponent's Pokemon. The Break Pokemon were just a lot of fun. I really like what they brought to the game. And at a time where Pokemon EX were very powerful in the Pokemon TCG, Pokemon Break were a buff that was given to regular non-Pokemon EX. And that's something that's really, kind of think about that. How often do the game designers give a buff to non-rule box Pokemon? They never do that, dude. They never do that. They always include the rule box Pokemon in whatever the newest mechanic is. Now, unfortunately, many of the Pokemon Break are quite bad, but there were quite a few good ones, right? Zoroark Break was good. Greninja Break was good. Trevenant Break was good. Talonflame Break was played in Greninja Break decks. Yveltal Break was played at a time. Xerneas Break was played at a time. I really wish that the Pokemon Company would do more mechanics exclusively for single prize Pokemon. To me, the Break Pokemon kind of stand out as being one of those cool, unique mechanics that was just for single prize Pokemon. So for that, I love them. You know what, guys? I'm going to freaking do it. Break's going in S tier, dude. Breaks in S tier. Breaks were so sick. They're going S tier. First S tier on the list, it's Breaks. The more I think about Breaks, the cooler they get. Pokemon EX dominated the black and white and X and Y blocks, but in Sun and Moon, they reinvented the Pokemon EX with the Pokemon GX. And Pokemon GX were groundbreaking. They were different from Pokemon EX because they evolved from regular single prize Pokemon. That was crazy because, as we saw, your EX were all big basic Pokemon. Even if it was like a Venusaur, the Venusaur was a basic. So unlike those big Pokemon EX, Pokemon GX evolved from their regular single prize counterparts, just like your Pokemon lowercase EX did from the mid-2000s and from your modern Pokemon TCG sets. So Gardevoir GX could be played right alongside Gallade, which was a single prize Pokemon. And that was a really cool way to play the game. Not only were these cards very fun and balanced to play with, they also all had a totally new thing going on, the GX attack. A GX attack was something you had to have a counter, and you could use your GX attack once a game. Only one GX attack could be used a game. Just like VSTAR powers, which we saw during the Sword and Shield block. But these were groundbreaking at the time because this is something that had never been done in the history of the Pokemon TCG. So you had to think very carefully about how to use your GX attack, which one of your GX Pokemon's attacks would you use, and so on and so forth. Another thing that I really loved about Pokemon GX was that they felt like they were really thoughtfully balanced along with their single prize counterparts. Again, the HP difference is not that big. I mean, we're talking about Pokemon that were printed in 2017 having the same amount of HP as Pokemon that were printed in 2011, right? So a huge time gap going on there, and the HP really did not get out of control, which is something that I really love and appreciate about these Pokemon. Another thing that you'll notice, I mean, look at here. Zoroark GX, a stage 1 Pokemon, evolves from Zorua. It's got 210 hit points. You compare that with an ENS Zoroark EX, which has 280 HP. It felt like they were really trying to keep these Pokemon GX balanced with their single prize counterparts. Even a stage 2 Pokemon like Gardevoir GX, 230 hit points. Now your Gardevoir EX has 310 hit points. And as I said earlier, I think that gulf has just been widening and widening over the years, and Pokemon has kind of been leaving the single prize Pokemon behind while continuing to power creep their multi-prize Pokemon. But I felt like Pokemon GX kind of strike the perfect balance between powerful cards, fun gameplay. The worst part about the GXs, in my opinion, was that their secret rares looked like this. The rainbow rares were just ugly as sin. I know barely any people who really like the rainbow rares. I mean, they look absolutely horrendous, dude. I mean, just miserable cards. Thank God we're done with those. The full arts also look horrible, but a lot of the regular arts look really good. So like you can forgive the secret rares not looking great because the regular ones look really good. And there also are a lot of really nice secret art rares as well that we ended up getting. But yeah, oh my God, so many gaudy, ugly cards. But from a gameplay perspective, Pokemon GX were some of the best that the game had ever seen. That 2017 North American International Championship and the 2017 World Championships were some of the most fun that I have ever had playing the Pokemon TCG. And for that, Pokemon GX are also in S tier. A fun little mechanic they did during the GX era was that they introduced Ultra Beasts. Some of them were powerful Pokemon GX, like Blacephalon GX, but some Ultra Beasts were single prize Pokemon. Yay! I really love it when creatures decides to incorporate single prize Pokemon into whatever mechanic it is that they're doing. It just makes the mechanic way more dynamic and fun. I absolutely hate it when the mechanic only interacts with rule box Pokemon, like we see with Mega Pokemon, like we see with Tera Pokemon, all that. I think mechanics are so much more fun when you can have both rule box Pokemon and non-rule box Pokemon have that mechanic involved. So the Ultra Beast cards, their kind of gimmick was that all of them interact with the prize cards in some way. You had like Baby Buzzwole here with a sledgehammer attack, does more damage if your opponent has exactly 4 prize cards remaining. Dawnwing's Necrozma, right? Which you can only use its GX attack if you have more prize cards remaining than your opponent, and it makes you invincible. Ultra Necrozma GX has the Sky Scorching Light GX attack, which you can only use if the total of both players' remaining prize cards is 6, and you put 6 damage counters on each of your opponent's Pokemon. I mean, just a really cool thing, right? Ultra Beasts are kind of these like funky Pokemon that like, are they legendaries? Are they Pokemon? They're like Ultra Beasts. Like, what is an Ultra Beast, right? And their thing is that they all interact with the prize cards in some way, right? Buzzwole GX, Absorption GX does 40 damage for each of your remaining prize cards. There are also trainer cards that interact with Ultra Beasts, like the Beast Ring item card, which you could only play if your opponent had 3 or 4 prize cards remaining. You get to search your deck for up to 2 basic energy and attach them to one of your Ultra Beasts. Honestly, in hindsight, was not a huge fan of this card because it was just annoying. Like, you would be playing 4, 3, sometimes 2 Beast Ring in your deck because you needed to like hit them on the correct turn, but it's not like decks had out like Arven to go search them on the perfect turn. You just kind of had to like hope that you drew into them at the right time. So a lot of times you'd be like playing Cynthia to shuffle draw 6 and just like, God, I hope I draw into my freaking Beast Ring, right? Like that kind of thing happened a lot. Or I lose the game. It was like, I better draw into my Beast Ring or I like lose the game. So that was like kind of annoying, but ultimately I think that the tying Ultra Beast to the prize cards is pretty cool. So we're going to put Ultra Beast in A tier. Oh my God, dude. Tag team Pokemon, man. I mean, the Sun and Moon era was like a renaissance in the Pokemon TCG. Gameplay got so interesting. The decks were really fun to build and play. And then they came in with Tag Team Pokemon GX. I kind of got a love-hate relationship with tag team Pokemon. I certainly have quite a bit of nostalgia for them. As far as their artwork goes, I mean, absolutely incredible. All of them are illustrated by Arita. All the base artworks are illustrated by Arita. Arita really does an incredible job of selling these Pokemon partnerships. They all look great, right? And that certainly plays into the fun factor of the tag teams, is that they just look and feel great to play with. On the downside, they are big basic 3 prize Pokemon. We went from having these really cool GX Pokemon that evolved and played really nice with single prize Pokemon to tag team Pokemon, which kind of like redid the big basic EXification of the Pokemon TCG, right? Because now you do have Magikarp and Wailord Tag Team GX, which is actually bigger than any Pokemon. I mean, this is the biggest Pokemon card of all time at this point, and it was a basic, just absolutely nuts. Once we started really getting into the tag team era, they just kind of said, oh, heck with it, dude. Reshizard, 270 HP, 230 damage, or, Double Plays GX for 300 damage. Like, sure, okay, that's fine. Tag team Pokemon just kind of came in and dominated the game in a way that we really hadn't seen since the original Capital Pokemon EX released during the Black and White set. It really re-centered the game around all of these gigantic, big basic Pokemon. ADP, of course, one of the most infamous of the tag team Pokemon, literally allowed you to take extra prizes whenever you took a knockout, made your Pokemon do 30 more damage. It felt like tag team Pokemon were so powerful that when Sword and Shield came out, it felt like they kind of had to one-up themselves, and that was how Pokemon VMAX came into existence. Tag teams are undeniably beautiful and a very cool card to collect. As far as their gameplay goes, I don't think it was like the best, most inspired thing that Creatures has ever done. I'm not mad that Creatures has experimented with 3 prize Pokemon in the game's history. I don't feel like it's a place that we ever have to go again. I'm putting tag teams in C tier. I think they're all right, but anytime we're talking about a 3 prize mechanic, it's going to be pretty low on the list for me. Speaking of 3 prize Pokemon, another mechanic introduced during the Sword and Shield block was the V-Union. You had to have all 4 pieces of your V-Union in the discard pile. At that point, you could summon your V-Union into play, which was this kind of Exodia-looking 4-piece combo card that looked absolutely ridiculous on your bench. And it had like 4 attacks, and sometimes it had an ability to, it would give up 3 prize cards when it got knocked out. The cards were pretty much all horrible except for Mewtwo V-Union, which did end up winning, I think, a regional championship as a stall deck. So the idea is to just stall, and then you would whip out your Mewtwo V-Union, and it would never die because you would just use super regeneration over and over and over again until your opponent decked out. But that's pretty much all that V-Unions ever did. So I'm putting V-Unions in the D tier. I think that they're a pretty horrible mechanic. Now, Legends, on the other hand, absolutely gorgeous cards. I mean, unbelievable artwork on these things. I know you got to kind of turn your head to the side to see, but these Legends cards are incredible, and their value is finally starting to kind of show how cool they are, right? Like, your Legends pieces are actually starting to increase in value. They're from the Heart Gold, Soul Silver block. Like V-Unions, you had to combine 2 pieces in order to put one into play. You could only put a Legend into play if you had both halves in your hand at the same time, and then you could put it into play. They gave up 2 prize cards when they got knocked out. So coming after the Diamond and Pearl block, where there were no 2 prize Pokemon, and then coming into the Heart Gold, Soul Silver era, you had 2 prize Pokemon again, but they did feel balanced in a way because you had to jump through some hoops in order to get them into play. I think that the flavor of these things is just incredibly cool. The fact that you've got the 2 Pokemon on the same card, kind of in the same way that tag team Pokemon are cool from a collecting perspective. The illustration quality on these is absolutely top notch. I think as far as doing this mechanic, right? The mechanic where you kind of have to Exodia things into play. I think that Legend Pokemon are that mechanic done well. You had a few of these that actually saw some play. Entei Raikou Legend was quite good. You had Rayquaza and Deoxys Legend was also quite good. I'm putting Legend Pokemon solidly in B tier. I think that they're fun. Oh, A-Specs. A mechanic that was brought into the Pokemon TCG during the Black and White block originally, then was revisited during the Scarlet and Violet block. And good Lord, look at how many more A-Specs they printed during Scarlet and Violet than the original Black and White era A-Specs. A-Specs are trainer cards that are so powerful, you can only play one of them in your deck, like one A-Spec total. So they do kind of add some fun to the deck building process where you have to think about, oh, well, which A-Spec am I going to play? Personally, I think the A-Specs are kind of too broken. I don't really like what they bring to gameplay. They create more really obnoxious swing momentum turns that I'm not really a fan of. Also, if your deck relies a little bit too heavily on the A-Spec, which many decks do because they are just that powerful, then prizing just becomes like a really annoying issue with the whole A-Spec mechanic. I do really like that they decided to make them pink because when you are prize checking for your A-Specs, it makes it very easy to see if your A-Spec is in the deck. And a lot of times you want to see if your A-Spec's in the deck immediately because it is such an important part of your game plan. Back in the day, during the Black and White era, Computer Search was kind of your premier A-Spec along with Dowsing Machine. Dowsing Machine was like an item finder, could get a card from the discard pile into your hand. Computer Search just allowed you to search your deck for whatever you wanted. G-Booster was the A-Spec for your Genesect EX, which is a plasma deck. G-Booster is also a plasma A-Spec. How cool is that, right? Like I said, the plasma mechanic was a villain mechanic done correctly, even comboed with other mechanics like the A-Spec. But one of the major problems with the Virizion Genesect deck, which was a World Championship winning strategy, by the way, was that if you prized your G-Booster, SOL, dude, that is like kind of the biggest issue with the A-Specs in my mind, just prizing. And then also, I think that they create almost too much of a momentum swing for a single card. So I'm putting A-Specs in C tier. They are, but not my favorite part of the Pokemon TCG. As far as there being cards that you can only play one of in your deck, Pokemon has done this concept multiple times. You have A-Specs, which are singleton trainers that you can play in your deck, but we also had Radiant Pokemon, which you could only play one of in your deck. Most Radiant Pokemon were not all that great. They only released, like 16 of them, it looks like. Maybe less. Yeah, less, because we've got 2 Radiant Charizards on here. Radiant Greninja was far and away the best one. It could draw cards if you discarded an energy from your hand. It's a basic Pokemon, of course. So all the Radiants are basics, even though you have Pokemon on them that would typically be associated with evolution. Radiant Charizard was like the other big one. Radiant Charizard could do 250 damage for just 1 energy at the end of the game. Moonlight Shuriken was also an absolutely broken attack in any deck that could power it up, whether it was a Palkia V-Star deck or a Baxcalibur deck. Moonlight Shuriken just being able to deal 90 damage to 2 of your opponent's Pokemon on a single prize Pokemon, like on a basic. It's just absolutely obscene attack, obscene ability. The power level of these single prize Pokemon, I mean, it's just like through the roof, like unimaginably high. So for me, Radiance, I mean, like, yeah, nah, D tier. I definitely had fun playing with Radiant Greninja in my Baxcalibur deck. Sure. As a mechanic, as a whole, I didn't feel like that they were really realized to their fullest potential. I feel like they were kind of mid as a mechanic for sure. Now, compare the Radiant mechanic. You could only play 1 Radiant Pokemon in your deck to the Prism Star mechanic, which was a thing during the Sun and Moon era, and you'll see why the Prism Star mechanic was much more interesting. The Prism Star mechanic is similar in a way. The Prism Star rule is that you can't have more than 1 Prism Star card with the same name in your deck. And then when the card got discarded, it would go to the lost zone instead of the discard pile. So these cards were very powerful, but they were intended to not be reused throughout the course of a game. Compare that with a card like Radiant Charizard or Radiant Greninja, who you would just bring back into play if that sucker got knocked out. Like, oh yeah, bring them back. We're just going to reuse them. Yeah, you couldn't do that with Prism Stars. They were a little bit more balanced in that way. They also had Stadium Prism Stars, Energy Prism Stars, Pokemon Prism Stars, Energy Prism Stars. You could just not play a Prism Star of the same name in your deck. So you could play your Beast Energy with your Diancie Prism Star. Decks did that for sure because these cards were very good. Diancie Prism Star made it so that your fighting Pokemon did 20 more damage. Beast Energy made it so that your Ultra Beast did 30 more damage. Stadiums were really good, right? You had like Thunder Mountain Prism Star, made it so that your lightning Pokemon's attacks cost 1 lightning energy less, really helped to actualize your Pikachu and Zekrom Tag Team GX. Tapu Koko Prism Star with the Dance of the Ancients ability was just a one-off ability you would use, send the Tapu Koko to the Lost Zone, accelerate a couple lightning energy into play. These cards were really good and fun to play with. Some of them were pretty lackluster. I mean, not all of these were good, but Super Boost Energy, that was a card that was seen, that saw play in Regional Championship winning deck. Ditto Prism Star, I think, is the coolest of all of the Prism Stars. The Almighty Evolution ability kind of allows Ditto to act as a wild card basic. It allows it to evolve into any Stage 1 Pokemon that you want. And I wouldn't mind if this kind of card was an evergreen effect in the Pokemon TCG. Really, I think it's such a fun mechanic. And it just made deck building really fun as well because it was really easy to splash 1/1 lines of whatever Stage 1 card you wanted with Ditto Prism Star. So what I loved about Ditto Prism Star is it really made deck building more interesting. I felt like with all of the Prism Stars, they all kind of made deck building a little bit more interesting. And I love the fact that they were balanced. They went to the Lost Zone instead of the discard pile, so you couldn't reuse and abuse them. And you really had to think about which Prism Stars you were going to be including in your deck, if any, when you set out to build your deck. Prism Stars are looking mighty fine in the B tier. During the mid-2000s, some of the most iconic collectible cards of all time were released. The Gold Stars. These are incredibly beloved cards by collectors and players. Many of them were good, and they are very highly sought after for obvious reasons. I mean, they're shiny, okay? First of all, they're freaking shiny. They are about 20 years old at this point, like almost 20 years old, as they were printed in 2006 and 2007. And they're all basics. They are all illustrated by Fukada, who I got to meet once, and I had him sign my Suicune Gold Star, I think at the Dallas Regional Championships like years ago, pre-pandemic. The Gold Stars are really cool. You can only have one Gold Star Pokemon in your deck. Highly collectible cards, very powerful as well. The best one is Mew Gold Star. It's got the Mimicry attack, allows you to copy one of your opponent's Pokemon's attacks, which is obviously very good if you're copying an EX Pokemon's attack with a single prize Pokemon. Not hard to imagine how that's going to be good in the Pokemon TCG. You've also got Charizard Gold Star, which is like actually kind of playable. Does 150 damage for 5 energy. Rayquaza Gold Star is like probably one of the priciest of all of them, but was actually a playable card as well with that Holy Star attack. Did 100 damage to each of your opponent's Pokemon EX, so you could punish your opponent for overloading their board with Pokemon EX. Really incredible cards. As far as the artwork goes, really iconic, extremely unique. Pokemon Star, ultimately not like the most interesting mechanic, but the cards are extremely cool and collectible. So I'm like between A and B tier, but I think the Star Pokemon can go in the B tier. Most of them were not really impactful or good at all, but they are undeniably extremely cool. Now, at this point, we've talked at length about the various multi-prize Pokemon that have been released throughout the years, but the very first multi-prize Pokemon ever released in the Pokemon TCG were Pokemon lowercase EX. And when they first debuted in the Ruby and Sapphire sets, they were really, really, really bad, actually. It seemed like the game designers were trying really, really hard to make sure that their new 2-prize Pokemon didn't just destroy the Pokemon TCG, right? They almost tried a little bit too hard. But eventually, Pokemon EX became a staple part of the Pokemon TCG. A few sets in, by the time the Sandstorm expansion had come out, Gardevoir EX was a major player in the Pokemon TCG. During the 2004 World Championship format, you had Blaziken EX, got second place at 2004 Worlds as well. Swampert EX, another major player. But the thing about these EX Pokemon and what made them so great was that they played seamlessly alongside the non-rule box Pokemon. They interacted with the single prize Pokemon perfectly. And you could see that the game designers really eased their way into this new era of the Pokemon TCG by making sure that they didn't just come out and destroy the game with Pokemon that were way too strong. They just eased their way in. These Pokemon evolved from their single prize counterparts like the modern Pokemon EX do, except the modern Pokemon EX have so much HP and are so powerful and so dominant that they dwarf all of the single prize Pokemon that dare to stand up to them. These Pokemon EX were not that way. Like Blaziken EX was played alongside the single prize Blaziken, and you would have other single prize Pokemon in the deck that you played with. Swampert EX was played alongside the single prize Swampert, and your Blastoise EX was played along other various attackers. Other EX Pokemon all kind of made up this Blastoise EX deck, but you could also attack with like Alakazam Gold Star, and you could attack with Mew Gold Star. Yeah, there's just like a lot of really cool different things that you could do in these EX decks from the original EX era. It just felt like their power level was really thoughtfully designed. And that's why so many people consider the 2006 or RSPK formats to be the best formats ever in the history of the Pokemon TCGs, because of the variety of decks that you could build, because of the way that these multi-prize Pokemon interact with the rest of the card pool. It didn't feel like Pokemon was kind of forcing you to just play with whatever most recent card they released. It felt like the game design was just incredibly thoughtful, and everything just played together really well. So the original Pokemon EX, they are S-tier design, from the way that the cards look with the silver borders to the way that they play. The formats that they made up were some of the best formats that the Pokemon TCG has ever seen. And for me, the original Pokemon EX will always be a point to chase for the game designers for the rest of the game's history, right? This is something, if you can recapture the magic of those original Pokemon EX and how they played in those formats, then you're going to be having a great time playing the Pokemon TCG. We've talked a little bit about Pokemon trying to do the villain mechanic and what a good villain mechanic looks like and what a failed villain mechanic looks like. Yeah, Pokemon is trying to do Aqua and Magma twice now. They did it as a mini set during the X and Y block with the Double Crisis expansion, which is kind of just like a nostalgic rehashing of the Pokemon that were originally released during the original EX block in the Magma versus Aqua expansion. Now, Team Magma's Groudon was a World Championship winning deck. This is the deck that won Worlds in 2004. It basically played a bunch of big basic Pokemon with Claydol and Camerupt to support them. It kind of was the first canned archetype that creatures just kind of released, right? They put all these Magma cards together. You literally had to play all the Magma cards together because Team Magma's Groudon, the best Magma card in the set, has the Power Saver Pokebody, which you have to have at least 4 Team Magma Pokemon in play in order for it to attack. So you can't really play the Magma stuff with anything else. You can't really play the Aqua stuff with anything else. This is kind of everything that I hate about the owner's Pokemon mechanic, just with a villain flavor to it. So for me, the Aqua and Magma mechanic is going in D tier because really it's just a different flavor of the owner's Pokemon, and I'm not into any of those. The very first singleton mechanic that creatures ever did was the Shining Pokemon, which were released during the Neo block. They are very collectible, very cool cards. They're also all basics, like Gyarados, which would typically be a stage 1, is a basic. Shining Charizard would typically be a stage 2, but it's a basic. And all these Shining Pokemon have these kind of really funky attacks that are like impossible to use. The gimmick of them is that you can't have more than one Shining of the same name in your deck. So like you can only have one Shining Mewtwo in your deck. You can only have one Shining Tyranitar in your deck. But these guys are all absolutely terrible. Not a single one of them was playable. So Shining Pokemon, yeah, that's a D tier mechanic if I've ever seen one. Crystal Pokemon were a thing during the e-reader sets, right? And again, these are like extremely collectible, very cool cards, but they're all absolutely miserable. I mean, just unplayable. They all have this crystal type Pokebody, which makes it so that whenever you attach a basic energy of a certain type to the Pokemon will then turn into that type until the end of the turn. But that Pokebody is not enough to warrant playing these terrible Pokemon cards with terrible attacks that are just way too expensive. But if you're lucky enough to own one of these crystal Pokemon, good for you. It's another D tier mechanic, just cool for collectors, but not really good for gameplay at all. Now, during the Wizards of the Coast era, the game was at a low point right before the introduction of Neo Genesis. Players were very frustrated with the way that games were playing out. There was a lot of turn 1 wins or uninteractive strategies where you could just strip your opponent of all of their trainer cards before they had a chance to play. Sometimes you could strip your opponent of their entire hand before they had a chance to play. And the game was really struggling from a design perspective. Enter Neo Genesis and the introduction of baby Pokemon with the baby rule. Baby Pokemon were 30 hit point basic Pokemon that you had to flip a coin if you were attacking when your opponent had a baby Pokemon active. So there's a 50% chance your attack just straight up did not launch if your opponent had a baby Pokemon in the active spot. And then combine that with the fact that baby Pokemon had very useful attacks and abilities like this Cleffa here with its Eek attack. Obviously, the most iconic of all the baby Pokemon. It got a reprint in the Celebrations 25th anniversary expansion. Eek allows you to shuffle your hand into your deck and draw 7 cards. So to help counteract all of the degenerate stuff that creatures had come up with leading up to Neo Genesis, they introduced baby Pokemon, which kind of forcibly slowed the game down and also allowed you to draw cards without having trainer cards. Baby Pokemon, kind of a love-hate thing. They definitely changed the pace of the game and allowed evolution decks to start seeing play in the Pokemon TCG. Before these baby Pokemon came out, it was a lot of just like big basic strategies, stripping your opponent of all their trainer cards. Maybe you were playing Wigglytuff to just go in and do the wave and knock out your opponent's Pokemon as fast as possible while stripping their hand of trainer cards with Rocket Sneak Attack and stuff like that. But baby Pokemon forced the game to slow down and made games more thoughtful at the cost of extreme randomization via coin flip. So a double-edged sword for sure. Baby Pokemon did kind of forever change the trajectory of the Pokemon TCG when they came out, and they really helped to heal the damage that had been done to the competitive player base because they allowed more players to get into thoughtful games that really involved a lot of resource management and stuff like that. Baby Pokemon did a lot for the history of the Pokemon TCG when they came out, and that's why we're going to put Baby Pokemon in A tier, because they saved the game. They did. They might be frustrating, and I'm not saying you're going to love going back to play with Baby Pokemon in current year. If you go back and play with them, you're not going to think it's awesome. But Baby Pokemon were such a important inflection point in the game's history that they have to kind of be high on the tier list for me. During the Sword and Shield expansion, we saw the introduction of the battle styles mechanic. They had Rapid Strike Pokemon, which had their own set of support, and then Single Strike Pokemon, which had their own set of support, and they didn't really play nice together, right? Like, you didn't really play Rapid Strike Pokemon in your Single Strike deck. You didn't really play Single Strike Pokemon in your Rapid Strike deck. You also had Mew VMAX, of course, the most infamous of the Fusion Strike Pokemon, and Fusion Strike Pokemon were kind of their own thing. Those are the battle styles: Fusion Strike, Single Strike, Rapid Strike. And honestly, they kind of just feel like these labels or teams that are slapped on to Pokemon, and then there's just some trainers that interact with them, or abilities that interact with your Rapid Strike or Single Strike Pokemon in specific ways. Like, for Single Strike Pokemon, you had this Houndoom with its Single Strike Roar ability, which could accelerate energy onto your Single Strike Pokemon. And Rapid Strike Pokemon had an Octillery, which would allow you to search out Rapid Strike cards from your deck and put them into your hand. There was a Rapid Strike Energy and a Single Strike Energy and a Fusion Energy. I wasn't in love with these mechanics because it feels like you're really just kind of putting a team on certain Pokemon. It makes it so that they can't play well with other Pokemon. It's kind of more of that feeling that the Pokemon Company is just trying to feed you a deck or feed you an archetype. As a deck builder and a player, that's not really the most exciting way for me to play the game. So for me, battle styles are a D tier mechanic, even though I loved Mew VMAX. I played the crap out of Mew VMAX, but like, from a game design perspective, I thought the battle styles were pretty mid. Wasn't super into them. The Paradox Pokemon are very similar to that. You've got future Pokemon and ancient Pokemon. Of all the future Pokemon and ancient Pokemon, Raging Bolt EX, probably my favorite. I don't know. Iron Hands EX is also pretty good, where Raging Bolt is probably the best ancient Pokemon. Iron Hands EX is probably the best future Pokemon. These mechanics feel like even more of a failure than the Rapid Strike, the Fusion Strike mechanic, because at least like the Fusion Strike deck was a good deck. The Rapid Strike deck was like a good deck. The Single Strike deck didn't end up being as good as the other ones, but at least like the Rapid Strike and the Fusion Strike deck were like really good decks. And then you ended up playing like the Single Strike Pokemon with Lugia, because it ended up being that Lugia VSTAR with Archeops was actually the best way to accelerate your Single Strike energy into play, not that silly Houndoom. So that ended up being kind of funny. So in a way, all of those ended up being playable. But the future archetype Pokemon was like trying to cook up and feed you never really ended up being a thing. I mean, sure, Iron Thorns EX like won Worlds, I guess. The concept, what they were trying to do with like the reboot pod and all that, none of that ended up working out with like the Miraidon, the peak acceleration, kind of just was a big flub. Didn't really work the way that maybe they thought it would. Cobalt Command, boosting. They're really trying to rehash the Plasma deck from years and years ago, and it just kind of felt like a cheap knockoff of the real thing rather than the thing itself. The ancient stuff, I mean, like Earthen Vessel's a very good card. Sada's Vitality is like really good for putting energy onto your Raging Bolt. Raging Bolt is like an incredibly broken card. Ultimately, I'm just like not really feeling inspired by the future and ancient mechanics either. So for me, the future and ancient stuff is also just a D tier mechanic. Like, you're slapping flavor on stuff. It's not really interesting from a game design perspective. I really love the vibe of Dark Pokemon. I mean, these, in my opinion, are some of the coolest cards that Pokemon has ever made. That is the collector side of me, okay? The light Pokemon are also really cool. I think they're cool. From a collector standpoint, I love the flavor of the light Pokemon and the dark Pokemon. I think that the dark Pokemon have really neat and unique artworks. I love the idea that these Pokemon are somehow like evil versions of the regular Pokemon. It really, to me, kind of drives home that each Pokemon has its own personality and can express itself. I really like and enjoy the light and the dark Pokemon canonically within the Pokemon TCG, right? It's not something that they have in the video game. There aren't light Pokemon and dark Pokemon in the video game. They have them in Pokemon Go, I guess. The look and feel of the cards, amazing. But I have to admit, from a gameplay perspective, the light and the dark mechanic are the same exact mechanic as all of these other team mechanics where you just kind of slap a label on something and that's it. It's like the same thing as Owner's Pokemon. It's the same thing as Aqua and Magma. It's the same thing as Battle Styles. It's the same thing as Paradox. These are my favorite. I like these, but these kind of were like the original Pokemon that I had problems with because you can't evolve a regular Crocodile into Dark Feraligatr. I've always had a beef with this. It sucks. From a game design perspective, let me play my regular Feraligatr and my Dark Feraligatr in the same dang deck without having to have a different Crocodile in both the decks. That's been my beef with all of these mechanics forever, and it's still my beef with them today. So as much as I absolutely love and adore the Rockets Pokemon, the Dark Pokemon, all that, these are like my favorite Pokemon cards that have ever been printed, I have to acknowledge that from a game design perspective, they're just pretty uninspired. At least like the mid 2000s dark Pokemon were actually pretty good. You know, like Dark Electrode is really good. Dark Tyranitar is really good. Dark Ampharos is really good. But from like a game design perspective, they're really just not that interesting mechanics. So as much as I want to put it in C tier just because I love the way they look, I have to acknowledge that they are just like kind of a trash tier mechanic. The Lost Zone is a mechanic that has been brought into and then removed from and then brought back into and removed from the Pokemon TCG throughout the years. Originally debuting in the Diamond and Pearl Platinum era with the release of Giratina, kind of the Lost Zone guy, the bringer of the Lost Zone. And honestly, I love the existence of the Lost Zone in the Pokemon TCG. I think it's good and healthy for card games to kind of have a purged territory where a card cannot be recovered from. In the Pokemon TCG, lots of things get played from and out of the discard pile. The Lost Zone, it's a different zone. It's a zone that you can't come back from the Lost Zone. Now, there have been cards that reference the Lost Zone, like Mew Prime here can use the attacks of all Pokemon in the Lost Zone as its own attack. So you can reference the Lost Zone. We also, of course, have had Pokemon that do more damage if you've got Pokemon in the Lost Zone, like Jump Bluff with the Lost March attack, kind of a famously terrible deck archetype there. And then most recently, we've got your Giratina V-Star, which interacts with the Lost Zone by putting its own energy in the Lost Zone, and then, of course, instantly KOing your opponent's Pokemon if you have 10 or more cards in the Lost Zone. And that was kind of the idea of these most recent Lost Zone variants. With the Sableye, you have to have 10 or more cards in the Lost Zone, and you can put 12 damage counters on your opponent's Pokemon in any way you like. So you had to shuttle cards into the Lost Zone quickly, and you've got trainer cards that help you to do that, like Lost Vacuum and Colress's Experiment. I think that the Lost Zone is pretty freaking sweet. I'm glad that it exists. I think they've used the Lost Zone thoughtfully throughout the years by balancing cards like Tapu Koko Prism Star. Tapu Koko Prism Star would be way too broken if you could reuse that Dance of the Ancients ability over and over again, but since it Lost Zones itself, they can make sure that you can't do that. So we're putting Lost Zone in A tier. Solid mechanic. I'm never mad when they bring it back. Kind of a funny thing they did during the Diamond and Pearl era was they started giving Pokemon held items, which basically like abilities or traits that Pokemon had It's kind of a funny thing. It almost, in a way, makes the trading card game feel a little bit more adjacent to the video game because Pokemon holding items is a very video game-esque thing for Pokemon to do. That's something to do in the video game. In the Pokemon TCG, Pokemon have tools that you attach to them, right? It doesn't really make sense for Pokemon to have like a held item because tools are the way that the game designers are incorporating that held item aspect with Pokemon cards. So for them to have a held item printed on the card and then also be able to wear a tool is just kind of silly and redundant to me. These kind of operate in the same way that Pokemon traits did. They are like abilities that cannot be interacted with in any kind of way. They're not terribly exciting. They're kind of just the exact same as traits. This Combi, I think, is the best one. Once during your turn, when you put Combi from your hand onto your bench, you may search your discard pile for a basic Pokemon and put it onto your bench. I mean, that's pretty good. But like that could have just been an ability. Did it need to be like a held item trait thing? Probably not. Yeah, I put traits in C tier and held items are pretty much the same thing. So I'll put held items in C tier. Like they're fine. It's like whatever, really. Finally, we've saved the best for last, folks. Holons and Delta species, some of the best mechanics that the Pokemon TCG has ever seen. They are both S tier, and now I will tell you why. Delta species Pokemon are kind of the coolest parts of the Pokemon TCG, all as a single mechanic. The Pokemon TCG game designers at Creatures can do whatever they want with the Pokemon trading card game. They don't actually have to obey what's going on with the video game, as evidenced by Delta species Pokemon. What are Delta species Pokemon? I don't know. They're Delta species. They come from the island of Holon. Have you ever heard of any of that stuff outside of the Pokemon TCG? No, of course not, because it is a self-contained piece of canon that only exists within the Pokemon trading card game. And right off rip, that's something that makes it incredibly cool because it makes the Pokemon trading card game different than any other parts of the Pokemon franchise and adds more to its lore. It adds more to its history because it's got its own thing going on. On the Holland's Island or whatever, from what I've been able to tell from chat who's informing me, you have these Delta species Pokemon, which basically are not beholden to their original typing. You can have Pokemon that are any type. Delta species Pokemon are like an experiment gone wrong on the Holon Island. And that's just like a piece of lore self-contained to the Pokemon TCG so that the game designers could do this really cool and fun and imaginative stuff. You've got Pupitar. This guy's lightning. Ladybug. This guy's metal. They're just nonsense types, which really kind of breaks open the Pokemon TCG and allows the game designers to imagine what would a psychic type Typhlosion look like? What would a lightning type Feraligatr look like? What would a grass type Snorlax look like? What would a metal type Nidoqueen look like? What would a fire type Melodic look like? The Delta species and Holon mechanics are the absolute best of what the Pokemon trading card game has to offer because it is the game designers being the most creative that they have ever been. There's just so many good abilities, so much thoughtful design going on, so much fun. And I think that that's what makes the Delta species Pokemon so special, is that they are fun. You could tell that the game designers are having fun, and that fun is contagious when we as fans are playing with and interacting with the cards. When you look at modern mechanics like VMAXs or even the new Megas, a lot of times it feels like the game designers are kind of like punching a box. They're kind of doing what they have to do. It almost feels like business as usual, where game design in the Pokemon TCG didn't used to feel that way. It used to feel like the game designers were being more playful and having more fun. And that's one of the reasons why people look back at this era of the game with such nostalgia. Not only was the gameplay peak, but the card designs were also peak. They were fun. It felt like a game. Like, games should be silly. Games should be fun, right? And it didn't feel like that the game designers were taking things too seriously. It's lighthearted. My Togetic is water type. Sure, whatever, dude. My Charmander is lightning type. Like, yeah, because he's part of an experiment gone wrong on Holon Island. Duh. They just don't do stuff like that anymore. And that's why this is one of the most iconic eras of the Pokemon TCG, is because the mechanics were like A+, and the gameplay was even better. Now, the lore behind the Delta species Pokemon is that they come from the Holon Island, and there are these scientists doing experiments on the Pokemon, and the experiments have gone wrong, and that's why these Delta species Pokemon are the way that they are. The lore was kind of fully built up with all these different trainer cards that you had that interacted with Delta species Pokemon, and were just very good cards and very fun to play with. Holon Transceiver, kind of one of the most iconic trainer cards from this time. Allows you to search your deck for a supporter card with Holon in its name, or search your discard pile for a supporter with Holon in its name and put it into your hand. And that's obviously incredible because the Holon supporters are all really good. Holon Mentor allows you to just set up your deck by getting 3 basic Pokemon. You've got like Holon Scientist, which draws cards. Holon Adventurer also draws cards, and you've got Holon Farmer, which recovers cards. So all of the different things that you would kind of want out of a supporter card, except for hand disruption, you can search out with Holon Transceiver. If you're playing 4 Holon Transceiver, you only have to play like 1 Holon Scientist, and then you could just reuse that Holon Scientist as much as you want to. You've also got the Holon Cast Form and all these other Holon Pokemon, which count as special energy, like they're Pokemon that you can attach as special energy. They really allow you to kind of build unique decks, and you don't need to actually play like whatever kind of different energy cards you may have previously needed to play in order to activate an attack. You can just play these kind of Holon's Pokemon that act as rainbow Pokemon. You could use Holon's Mentor to go search out like a Holon's Cast Form. That's just like one of the most broken combos you can do. Use Holon's Mentor to go get some basic Pokemon out of your deck, and then you can use it to go get Holon's Cast Form. You can attach Holon's Cast Form as a special energy to one of your Pokemon, and then it counts as a double rainbow energy, but it's balanced because you have to balance another energy back into your hand when you attach it. Just so much thoughtful game design. I mean, I could really spend an hour just talking about the thoughtful game design of each of these Holon's cards. And all you have to do is really just start reading one of these like Holon Special Energy, and you'll get how deep the gameplay was during this time in the Pokemon TCG. Everything that was printed during this time felt this thoughtful and this planned out. That's why people consider these EX formats to be peak. The original Pokemon EX, Holons, and Delta species, people consider these to be peak Pokemon TCG. And I have to agree. This early EX era from 2005 to like 2007 is the best that the Pokemon TCG has ever been. The Sun and Moon era that had Zoroark GX with like Drampa GX, and then like the late X and Y era, that ended up being some of the next best peaks in the Pokemon TCG, like 2017 North American International Championships format, 2017 World Championships format. And that's why these are some of the best mechanics, right? Because they were some of the best formats that have ever been. And one of the reasons that they are the best formats that have ever been is because they had some of the best mechanics that have ever been as well. That is my tier list of every Pokemon TCG mechanic that they have ever done. Hopefully, you kind of have an understanding now of why I consider some of these formats from years past to be leagues better than some of the more uninspired copy-paste garbage that we've seen throughout the years. Hopefully, we can get some more fun, playful, creative stuff from creatures, and we can revisit some of those very high peaks that the Pokemon TCG has experienced throughout its history. I think that we're in a pretty good time for the Pokemon Trading Card Game right now currently, with the Scarlet and Violet EX block and the current megas. Like, it's okay. I'd say that the game's in a pretty decent spot, but it could be better.